How humans can reshape a planet in 1 second. The answer is hidden in every frame to follow. Today, I'll condense Earth's 4.6 billion year epic into a thrilling 24 hours. At midnight, a scorching hot star ignited in the cosmic kitchen. It was the future sun. Orbiting it was a dust cloud of ancient stellar remnants. In this chaos, a speck of dust began to absorb its neighbors, snowballing into something larger, eventually forming the proto-Earth. Back then, Earth was impatient. A day lasted only 6 hours, until a cosmic collision changed everything. At 0:40 a.m., Theia, a neighboring planet, the size of Mars, crashed into Earth. The impact was like spilling a pot of magma. Splattered fragments recombined under gravity, eventually forming Earth's exclusive nightlight, the Moon. The Moon's gravity, like an invisible hand, forcefully slammed the brakes on Earth's rotation, stretching a day from 6 to 24 hours. At 1:15 a.m., Earth finally entered cooling mode. Steam from volcanoes condensed into rain, pelting the scorching surface. This was Earth's first rain, but newly formed puddles quickly evaporated. Through this struggle, larger bodies of water stabilized. Earth back then was like a giant sauna, with water temperatures between 40 to 85 degrees Celsius, and some areas bubbling like a hot spring hot pot. Where did this water come from? Volcanic eruptions provided an internal source, and space wasn't idle either. Comets and asteroids, like delivery drivers, bombarded Earth with water and other packages. They haven't stopped to this day. Statistics show that 60 to 100 tons of space dust hit Earth daily, the weight of 30 SUVs. Imagine this. The sky above you is actually raining cosmic dust. At 1:52 a.m., underwater volcanoes spewed hot currents like pressure cookers. In these locations, nature formed natural chemical laboratories. Molecular combinations were freely rearranged. The first breakthrough occurred. The first organic molecules, amino acids, ribose, nucleic acids, and proteins, began to form. Over time, the primordial soup became saturated, and self-replicating structures emerged. At 4:30 a.m., a true milestone arrived. The first cell was born. From this moment, life on Earth officially existed. At 5:53 a.m., the first viruses appeared. Meanwhile, Earth's core split into 2 layers, a solid inner core and a liquid outer core. The liquid metal layer began to spin around the inner core, generating a magnetic field. This formed the magnetic poles. These poles shift every 200,000 to 300,000 years, equivalent to 5 to 6 seconds on our clock. At 11:13 a.m., primitive prokaryotes had formed the simplest ecosystems. They sought efficient ways to obtain energy. These organisms were very simple, like small houses without separate rooms. When one prokaryote, cyanobacteria, began photosynthesis, they learned to use sunlight to convert CO2 and water into food, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. This process transformed Earth's atmosphere. At 11:35 a.m., cyanobacteria's oxygen production went out of control. The atmosphere became toxic, triggering the first mass extinction in history. This was the Great Oxidation Event. But by then, bacterial communities capable of using oxygen for energy had appeared. They lived in rare oxygenated environments, which now began to spread across Earth. At 1:39 p.m., oxygen ignited a life revolution. Life took new forms. One cell engulfed another, but the swallowed cell wasn't digested. Instead, it adapted and performed useful functions. This endosymbiotic union led to a new type of cell, the eukaryotic cell. The difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is vast. Prokaryotes are like a studio apartment, everything in one room. Eukaryotes are like a well-furnished villa, with a separate study for genetic code, and mitochondria as power plants. At 3:43 p.m., cells decided to band together, starting a new mode of teamwork. Just 2 hours later, by 5:47 p.m., fully developed multicellular organisms had formed. The first sexually reproducing organisms, algae, appeared. The first fungi had also emerged. But Earth was about to undergo unexpected changes. No one anticipated. A devastating ice age was approaching. At 8:38 p.m., greenhouse gases plummeted, ocean currents stalled, and Earth crashed with a blue screen. Equatorial ice sheets were kilometers thick. Global temperatures dropped to -50 degrees Celsius. Most organisms were wiped out. Survivors huddled around deep-sea vents, clinging to life in geothermal springs. At 8:43 p.m., Continuous volcanic activity melted glaciers on land and in the oceans. Survivors occupied new ecological niches. At 9:02 p.m., the Avalonian explosion of life began. The Ediacaran biota emerged. These soft, radially symmetrical creatures, some like wriggling stalks, others like living carpets with LED-like lights, could reach tens of centimeters in length. Unlike earlier simple multicellular organisms, the Ediacaran biota displayed unprecedented diversity in form, structure, and lifestyle. At 9:12 p.m., the Cambrian explosion occurred. It was as if the creator got drunk and went wild clicking the random generate button. Nature began experimenting with different forms and functions. One of the earliest creatures to appear was the trilobite, an arthropod with a hard exoskeleton, which rapidly spread through the oceans. Ancestors of vertebrates also began to emerge, such as creatures with primitive notochords. There were also strange creatures like Anomalocaris, covered in spikes, and others with armor plates all over their bodies. Around 9:34 p.m., plants began to appear on land. These were still simple, moss-like organisms. They had no roots, absorbing water from the environment through their entire bodies. Once plants took root on land, they began to transform Earth itself. They produced oxygen and laid the groundwork for new ecosystems. These first plants not only stabilized the land, but also created habitats for the first land animals. At 9:40 p.m., as soon as plants rolled out the red carpet on land, arthropods arrived in groups. They were the ancestors of modern insects, spiders, and centipedes. As plants began to cover moist coastal areas, animals followed, seeking food and new habitats. At 9:50 p.m., the oceans were still teeming with life. The age of fish, the Devonian period, began. The waters were teeming with diversity, from jawless fish to large predators, including sharks and armored fish. Significant changes occurred among lobe-finned fish. One such creature, Tiktaalik, began using its fins to move underwater, almost like limbs. It seemed on the verge of a major evolutionary leap. At 10:05 p.m., an epic scene unfolded. The first amphibians emerged from water onto land. These creatures were descendants of lobe-finned fish. Their fins evolved into primitive limbs, allowing them to move on land. Ichthyostoga and Acanthostoga are famous examples from this period. They had simple legs, but still retained fins and lateral lines to sense vibrations in water. Although they still relied on water for reproduction and to stay moist, they could hunt and live on land. At 10:16 p.m., all land masses collided with a roar, forming the supercontinent Pangaea. These collisions led to the formation of mountains and climate shifts. The interior of the continent became dry, while coastlines became tropical. At 10:20 p.m., the first reptiles appeared on land, descended from amphibians. They developed features making them fully independent of water and expanded their habitats. These creatures were still small and unassuming. At 10:48 p.m., reptiles suddenly enabled a tech tree. Dinosaur 1.0 launched. These creatures were still small, like large lizards, but they had unique features. Unlike most reptiles of the time, their posture was upright. Dinosaurs walked with legs beneath their bodies, not splayed to the sides. This made them faster and more agile. They branched into two main groups: the Saurischians, including carnivores like T-Rex, and herbivores like Diplodocus. The other branch was the Ornithischians, which later evolved into giant herbivores, like Triceratops and Stegosaurus. At 11:13 p.m., some dinosaurs betrayed their kin. Theropod descendants secretly grew feathers. One of the earliest species was Archaeopteryx, combining dinosaur features, like teeth and a tail, with the ability to fly short distances. Over time, feathers were used for flight, wings elongated, and bodies became more streamlined. Confuciusornis, with its short tail and beak, became one of the first true birds. Modern birds thus evolved from dinosaurs. At 11:16 p.m., the plant kingdom staged a power struggle. The first angiosperms appeared. Before this, Earth was dominated by ferns, conifers, and ginkgos. They reproduced via spores or naked seeds. By developing flowers and fruits, angiosperms gained significant evolutionary advantages. Complex flower structures allowed plants to attract pollinators like insects. This symbiotic relationship between plants and pollinators proved incredibly successful. Earth flourished. Both oceans and land teemed with life. There were no signs of impending disaster. At 11:39 p.m., Earth received a cosmic delivery, an asteroid about 6 miles in diameter, traveling at 12 miles per second, struck Earth. The impact site was near today's Yucatan Peninsula. Everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius instantly vaporized. The impact created a crater about 20 miles wide and several miles deep. Huge clouds of dust and debris enveloped Earth, plunging it into darkness. Skies darkened. Dust blocked sunlight. Temperatures soared. Fierce winds and fires swept the land. Forests burned. Ecosystems were destroyed. Oceans boiled. Animals died from heat and lack of oxygen. Soon after, with less sunlight reaching Earth's surface, global temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis ceased. Ecosystems collapsed. Dinosaurs became extinct from cold and starvation. The climate became harsh. Storms, tsunamis, earthquakes, and wildfires ravaged Earth. Years later, the dust began to settle, and sunlight reached the surface again. The climate began to recover, but under the faint sunlight, a heartbreaking sight emerged. Up to 75% of all species had vanished forever. Survivors desperately adapted to new environments. As ecological niches reopened after the catastrophic extinction, life on Earth began to recover. Temperatures returned to normal, though the climate was permanently altered. This marked the rise of mammals. Mammals, once small and primarily nocturnal, now occupied the vacant niches and evolved rapidly. Their warm-bloodedness, live birth, and fur made them dominant. Some stayed on land, some returned to water, others settled in trees. Among these, special mammals emerged. At 11:40 p.m., dark figures darted across moonlit treetops. The first primates appeared. They sought food in trees and protected themselves from ground predators. Plesiodopus emerged during this time, one of the earliest creatures classified as a primate. They developed key characteristics. Vision became their primary sense. They had flexible limbs and fingers for climbing, and an enlarged brain, ensuring good vision and coordination. At 11:49 p.m., the first Old World monkeys appeared. 11 minutes later, a legendary scene was about to unfold on the African continent. Dense forests turned into dry savannas. Primates were forced to descend from trees and adapt to life on land. Our ancestors, the hominids, stood their ground. They might not climb trees, but they wouldn't lose their dignity. Thus began bipedal locomotion. While still retaining some ape-like features, their freed hands could skewer meat or throw spears. The seal on intelligence was violently broken at this moment. At 11:59 p.m. and 13 seconds, everything happened in the last minute of history. Homo habilis appeared. Homo habilis had a relatively large brain, around 600 to 750 cubic centimeters, compared to their predecessors. However, their body structure was still quite primitive, with long arms and small stature. At 24 seconds into the last minute of history, Homo erectus emerged. They had larger brains, ranging from 850 to 1100 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus fully adapted to bipedalism and had more proportional limbs. Homo erectus took a decisive step, leaving Africa and spreading to Asia and Europe. They also began to attempt to control fire. At 48 seconds, Homo heidelbergensis appeared. They had even larger brains, from 1100 to 1400 cubic centimeters. These people skillfully used fire and built shelters. They hunted large animals like mammoths and rhinos, using wooden spears and stone tools. This required collective effort and planning. 2 seconds later, Neanderthals emerged. They had larger brains, from 1200 to 1750 cubic centimeters. They were excellent hunters, and even more socially advanced. Neanderthals cared for the sick and elderly, buried their dead, and held rituals. They developed primitive speech abilities. At 54 seconds, Homo sapiens appeared. Like Neanderthals, they were descendants of Homo heidelbergensis. At this moment, these three species coexisted on Earth. Homo heidelbergensis in Africa, Europe, and West Asia. Neanderthals in Europe and the Middle East. And Homo sapiens in Africa. 2 seconds later, Homo heidelbergensis disappeared. They couldn't adapt to changing environmental conditions. Some went extinct, while others were assimilated into newer human species. At 58 seconds, the first modern Homo sapiens appeared. Almost immediately, they began migrating out of Africa to other continents. At 59 seconds into the last minute, Neanderthals became extinct. Some of their DNA remains in modern humans, due to interbreeding. Almost instantly after that, humans survived the last ice age. The climate became more stable, favoring agriculture and animal domestication. The Neolithic Revolution occurred. Humans developed agriculture, which completely transformed humanity. People shifted to settled life, Populations grew. Division of labor and social hierarchies emerged. Technological progress accelerated. At 95 milliseconds, the pyramids of Giza were built. Moments later, the first commercially successful steam engine was invented. Another 5 milliseconds passed. ARPANET, the precursor to the internet, was developed. Now, we are in the era of the internet and AI. In the final 0.001 milliseconds, the moment you swipe your phone to like something, 4.6 billion years of evolution unfolds.